Wait, before you scroll away. Because what this maid did on those marble steps, in front of a woman who thought she owned the world, is something you are not going to forget. 3-year-old girl. A mansion built like a palace. And a fiancé who had no idea the man she was about to marry was standing on that balcony, watching every single second. Welcome back, everyone. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from and which country you belong to. Drop it in the comments. I love seeing how far this story travels. Today's story is about power, pride, and the kind of love that doesn't announce itself with diamonds. It's about a woman who thought a uniform made someone small, and a little girl who was about to remind an entire household what really matters. Stay with me till the end because what happens on those steps is only the beginning. Nobody in that house ever looked twice at Maya Bennett, until the night she was told to disappear. Maya was 27 years old, and for the past 2 years she had worked as the head housemaid at the Whitmore estate, a mansion so large it had its own east wing just for guests who never came. She lived in the small staff quarters behind the garden with her daughter, Lily, a bright-eyed 3-year-old with a laugh that could fill an empty hallway. Lily's father was gone. He'd left before she was even born, and Maya had built their entire world out of double shifts, folded towels, and bedtime stories whispered in a room the size of a closet. The man who owned that mansion was Daniel Whitmore, 32 years old, a self-made billionaire who had built a tech empire from a garage and a stubborn refusal to quit. Daniel wasn't like the other wealthy men in his circle. He remembered the names of his staff. He asked about their families. And though nobody dared say it out loud, more than one person in that house had noticed the way his eyes softened whenever Lily came running through the halls in her little red shoes, arms open, calling him Mr. Daniel, like he was some kind of gentle giant instead of a man worth billions. But Daniel was engaged. His fiancée, Victoria Hale, 28 years old, was everything the tabloids loved. Polished, beautiful, born into old money that had somehow never quite grown as large as Daniel's new money. Victoria smiled for cameras and charities. She smiled less for people who couldn't do anything for her. From the very first week, Victoria made it clear she didn't think much of the staff. She called them the help instead of by name. She left messes for Maya to clean without so much as a glance. And she especially disliked Lily. The way the little girl's toys sometimes ended up in the wrong hallway, the way Daniel would kneel down to tie her shoe or ask if she'd eaten breakfast. "It's inappropriate," Victoria told Daniel one evening, swirling wine in a glass that cost more than Maya's weekly paycheck. "A child running around the house like she owns it. People will talk." Daniel had simply shrugged. "She's 3, Victoria. She's not plotting a takeover." Victoria hadn't laughed. That night was the night of the engagement gala, the biggest event the Whitmore estate had hosted in years. 300 guests. Photographers lined up outside the gates. Victoria had spent 6 months planning every detail, down to the exact shade of white for the orchids on each table. She wanted it perfect. She wanted it to be the night the whole world saw her as the next Mrs. Whitmore. Maya had been asked to work a double shift that evening, helping in the kitchen, then assisting with coats, then quietly making sure Lily stayed out of the way in the small sitting room off the kitchen, tucked in with a coloring book and a juice box. Lily was good. She always was. She understood, in the way small children sometimes understand more than adults expect, that this was a big night and she needed to be quiet. But children get restless. And around 9 o'clock, while Maya was refilling a tray of champagne glasses, Lily wandered out of the sitting room in search of her mother, straight into the middle of the grand foyer, where 200 guests in gowns and tuxedos were mingling beneath a chandelier the size of a small car. She didn't cause a scene. She didn't break anything. She simply stood there in her little red dress, looking lost, searching the crowd of tall strangers for the one face she trusted. And that was when Victoria saw her. The color drained from Victoria's face for half a second, not out of concern but out of horror. In front of donors. In front of press. In front of her future mother-in-law. A maid's child, wandering loose through her engagement gala like some kind of embarrassing accident nobody had cleaned up. Whose child is this? Victoria's voice cut through the chatter, sharp enough that heads turned. Maya came rushing from the kitchen doorway, tray still in her hands, heart pounding. "I'm so sorry, she must have wandered off, I'll take her right." "Take her outside," Victoria said, not even looking at Maya, only at the girl in the red dress. "Both of you. I don't want either of you inside this house tonight. Or any night, frankly." A hush fell over the nearest guests. "Victoria," Maya said quietly. "Please, I said outside," Victoria repeated, her voice rising just enough to make sure everyone heard. "You're a maid, not family. And that child does not belong at my engagement party." Maya's hands trembled as she set the tray down on a side table. She scooped Lily into her arms, the little girl's face already crumpling into confused tears, sensing something was wrong even if she didn't understand the words. What Victoria didn't know, what nobody in that glittering crowd of donors and socialites realized, was that on the balcony above them, half hidden behind the tall glass doors that led to his private study, Daniel Whitmore had come downstairs to check on the party. And he had heard every single word. The mini hook. Daniel didn't say a word. Not yet. And that silence would end up being the loudest thing in the entire mansion that night. He stood frozen at the top of the staircase, one hand resting on the marble railing, watching Maya carry his sobbing goddaughter. That's what the staff had started calling Lily, half-jokingly, because of how attached Daniel had become, out through the grand front doors and into the cold night air. Victoria straightened her dress, smoothed her hair, and turned back to her guests with a bright, practiced smile, as if nothing had happened at all. "Sorry about that, everyone," she said sweetly. "Staffing issue. All handled." A few guests chuckled uncomfortably. Someone raised a toast. The band picked the music back up. Within 90 seconds, the party had swallowed the moment whole, as if a woman and her child hadn't just been thrown out into the dark like trash left on the curb. But Daniel hadn't moved. He thought about the last 2 years. He thought about coming home from brutal board meetings to find Lily waiting by the kitchen door with a crayon drawing she'd made just for him. Usually some lopsided version of a rocket ship or a dog, because those were the two things she loved most in the world. He thought about the time he'd caught the flu badly enough to be bedridden for 4 days, and it was Maya. Not his assistant, not his housekeeper of 20 years, not Victoria, who quietly left soup outside his door every morning without ever asking for thanks, without ever making it about herself. He thought about the fact that in 2 years, Maya Bennett had never once asked him for anything beyond her paycheck. Not a favor, not a loan, not access. She simply worked and loved her daughter fiercely, and asked the world for nothing more than to be left in peace to do both. And Victoria, the woman he was supposed to marry in 4 months, had just stood in his home and called a mother and her 3-year-old daughter something that didn't belong. Daniel walked down the stairs, past the string quartet, past the ice sculpture shaped like 2 swans, past 300 guests who had no idea their host's world had just quietly cracked down the middle. Nobody stopped him. Nobody dared. Something in his face told people this was not the moment for small talk. He pushed open the heavy front doors himself. Outside, on the top step of the grand staircase, Maya sat with Lily curled against her chest, both of them shivering slightly in the November air. Maya's cardigan was thin. She'd left her coat inside in the rush, in the humiliation, in the desperate need to just get her daughter away from those staring eyes. Lily had stopped crying, but her small chin still trembled, her thumb tucked into her mouth the way it always did when she was scared. Maya. She looked up, startled, quickly trying to wipe her face before he could see she'd been crying too. Mr. Whitmore, I'm so sorry. I was just about to take her to the staff quarters. I didn't mean for her to. Stop. His voice was gentle but firm. He crouched down on the cold stone steps, right in front of Lily, ignoring the $2,000 tuxedo he was wearing. Hey, kiddo. You okay? Lily peeked out from behind her mother's shoulder and, despite everything, managed a small, wobbly smile. Mr. Daniel, she whispered. Something in Daniel's chest tightened. He looked up at Maya. How long has she been out here? 10 minutes, maybe. It's fine, really, we'll just. It's not fine. He stood, pulling off his suit jacket without hesitation, and wrapped it around Lily's small shoulders. It nearly swallowed her whole. None of this is fine, Maya. And I need you to know I heard what happened in there. All of it. Maya's eyes widened. Sir, please, I don't want any trouble. I can't lose this job. It's the only thing keeping a roof over. You're not losing your job. Daniel's jaw tightened. If anyone in that house is going to be asked to leave tonight, it's not going to be you. Before Maya could respond, the front doors opened again, and Victoria stepped out onto the porch, her heels clicking against stone. Her expression caught somewhere between confusion and irritation. Daniel, what are you doing out here? Our guests are asking. She stopped when she saw him crouched by Lily. When she saw his jacket wrapped around the little girl. When she saw the look on his face. Daniel, Victoria said slowly. What is this? I was about to ask you the same thing, he said, standing to face her. Victoria, you told a mother and her 3-year-old daughter to leave my home. In front of my guests. Because a toddler wandered into a room. She was a distraction, Victoria snapped, glancing nervously at the door as if worried the guests inside might hear. This is my night, Daniel, and I will not have the help's child running loose through it, embarrassing us in front of half the city's most important people. The help's child, Daniel repeated quietly. And that was when something in his expression changed. Something Victoria would spend the rest of the night trying and failing to understand. Here's the moment nobody at that party saw coming. The moment that would end one engagement and quietly begin something nobody expected at all. Do you know, Daniel said slowly, staring at Victoria with an intensity she'd never seen from him before, what Maya did for me during the worst week of my life? Victoria blinked. What are you talking about? 2 years ago. Before you and I were even together. I had pneumonia so bad the doctors wanted to admit me. I refused. I was too stubborn, too proud, too used to handling everything alone. Daniel's voice was steady, but there was something raw underneath it. For 4 days I couldn't get out of bed. My own family didn't know. My board didn't know. I told everyone I was working remotely. And every single morning there was soup outside my bedroom door. Homemade. Still warm. No note. No demand for recognition. I found out 3 weeks later it was Maya, because my housekeeper mentioned it in passing like it was nothing. Victoria's mouth opened, then closed. And Lily, Daniel continued, nodding toward the little girl still wrapped in his jacket, watching the adults with wide, uncertain eyes, has drawn me more pictures than anyone in my life has ever bothered to. She doesn't want anything from me. She just likes rockets and dogs and asking me if I ate lunch, because apparently a 3-year-old cares more about my well-being than half the boardroom does. Daniel, this is absurd. You're comparing me to. I'm not comparing you to anyone, he said. I'm telling you what I heard tonight. I heard you call a woman who has done nothing but work hard and raise her daughter alone the help. Like she's furniture. I heard you throw a 3-year-old out into the cold in November because her presence embarrassed you in front of people whose approval you care about more than you care about kindness. Victoria's face flushed, humiliation and anger warring across her features. You're seriously doing this right now? In front of her. She gestured sharply at Maya. At our engagement party. I'm doing this because of our engagement party, Daniel said. Because tonight showed me something about you I should have paid closer attention to a long time ago. Money doesn't scare me, Victoria. Cruelty does. The porch went silent except for the faint sound of the string quartet drifting out through the closed doors, playing on, unaware that the marriage the entire party had gathered to celebrate was quietly falling apart on the front steps. Maya, still holding Lily, took a small step back. Sir, please, I really don't think I should be here for this. You should, Daniel said gently, turning to her. Because this is about you being treated the way you deserve to be treated. Not just tonight. This whole time. Victoria let out a bitter laugh, folding her arms. Unbelievable. You're choosing the maid over me. Over your fiancé. Over everything we've built. I'm not choosing anyone over anyone, Daniel said. I'm choosing not to marry someone who thinks kindness is optional depending on who's watching. That's not a new discovery, Victoria. If I'm honest, I think some part of me has known it for a while. Tonight just made it impossible to keep ignoring. Victoria's eyes glistened, though whether from genuine hurt or wounded pride, even she probably couldn't have said. You're going to regret this. Do you understand what people will say? What the press will do with this? Let them say whatever they want, Daniel said quietly. I'd rather be the man who stood up for a mother and her daughter on his own front steps than the man who let his fiancée throw them out into the cold to protect his image. For a long moment nobody spoke. Somewhere inside the mansion, 300 guests continued to sip champagne, utterly unaware that the foundation of the evening had just crumbled 20 feet from where they stood. Then Victoria straightened her shoulders, gathered whatever dignity she had left, and walked back inside without another word. Not to salvage the party, but, as everyone would later learn, to quietly begin making arrangements to leave the estate before the night was over. Daniel exhaled slowly, then turned back to Maya, who stood frozen on the steps, still trying to process what had just happened. I'm sorry you had to see that, he said softly. And I'm sorry for what she said to you. It was wrong. All of it. Maya shook her head, tears welling up again, though these felt different from the humiliated ones she'd cried minutes earlier. Sir, you didn't have to do that. You didn't have to end your engagement over. I didn't end it over you, Daniel said gently. I ended it because of who she showed herself to be. You just happened to be the reason I finally saw it clearly. Lily, still bundled in his jacket, reached up and tugged on his sleeve. Mr. Daniel, she said softly, are you sad? Daniel knelt down again, meeting her eyes. A little. But I think I'm going to be okay. He managed a small smile. Especially since I still have my two favorite people in the whole world standing right here. Nobody expected what came next. Not the staff, not the guests, and certainly not Maya, who had spent 2 years believing kindness like this only existed in the stories she used to tell her daughter at bedtime. The following weeks were a blur of quiet change. Victoria's belongings were moved out within 2 days, and though the tabloids buzzed with speculation, broken engagement, billionaire scandal, mystery reasons, Daniel never once spoke publicly about what had happened on those front steps. He didn't need to prove anything to anyone. He simply went on with his life, quieter, steadier, somehow lighter than he'd been in months. Maya, meanwhile, braced herself for the worst. In her experience, when the powerful fought, it was always the powerless who ended up paying the price. She fully expected to be let go, a painful but familiar reminder that she was a witness to something the family would rather forget, and it would be easier to simply remove her than to keep the memory walking around the halls every day. Instead, 2 weeks after the gala, Daniel called her into his study. "I want to ask you something," he said, and Maya's stomach dropped, certain this was the moment she'd been dreading. "Sir, if this is about finding new work, I understand completely. I'll have my things packed by." "Maya." Daniel's voice was calm. "I'm not letting you go." She blinked. "You're not." "The opposite, actually." He gestured for her to sit, which she did, hesitantly, still braced for some other shoe to drop. "I've been thinking a lot the last 2 weeks. About what kind of house I want this to be. What kind of person I want to be in it. And I keep coming back to the same thing. You've worked here for 2 years, raised an incredible little girl practically on your own, and never once asked this family for anything beyond what you'd earned. Meanwhile, I let someone who demanded everything nearly become my wife." Maya didn't know what to say, so she said nothing. "I want to offer you a new position," Daniel continued. "Estate manager. Full oversight of household operations, a proper salary that reflects the work you've been doing far beyond your job title for 2 years now, and a real home on the property, not the staff quarters. An actual house on the east side of the grounds, for you and Lily." Maya's eyes filled instantly. "Sir, I don't know what to say. This is too much, you don't have to." "I'm not doing this out of pity, Maya," Daniel said firmly. "I'm doing it because you've earned it, and because I should have recognized it a long time ago instead of letting someone else define your worth in my own house." He paused, something softer crossing his face. "And because Lily deserves a place where she never again has to feel like she doesn't belong." Maya pressed a hand to her mouth, overwhelmed, the events of the gala night. The humiliation, the cold steps, the tears, finally giving way to something warmer, something she barely dared to trust. "Thank you," she whispered. "You have no idea what this means." "I think I do," Daniel said quietly. "More than you know." Over the following months, something shifted in the Whitmore estate that the staff noticed but rarely spoke about out loud, as though naming it might scare it away. Daniel started coming home earlier. He started eating dinner not alone in his enormous dining room, but often in the smaller kitchen, at the table where Maya and Lily ate, sharing simple meals and simpler conversation. Lily's crayon drawings began covering an entire section of his study wall, carefully framed, right next to a photograph of his late mother, the only other piece of personal decoration he'd ever kept in that room. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't dramatic. It was steady, the way real things tend to grow. A friendship built on soup left outside a sickroom door, deepening slowly into something neither of them rushed to name, because both of them understood in their own quiet way that some things are worth protecting by not forcing them. By spring, when Daniel finally asked Maya if she'd like to have dinner with him, not as employer and employee, not as billionaire and estate manager, but simply as two people who had somehow found something real in each other, Lily was the one who answered first, from where she sat coloring at the kitchen table. "Finally," the 3-year-old announced, without even looking up from her rocket ship drawing, "Mr. Daniel takes forever to notice things." Both adults laughed, and for the first time in longer than either could remember, it felt like the beginning of something neither of them had dared to hope for. And here's the part that made the whole staff cry. The part that proved some houses don't become homes because of what's inside the walls, but because of who's finally allowed to belong there. A year passed. The Whitmore estate looked different now, not in its architecture, but in its spirit. The grand ballroom that had once hosted Victoria's carefully curated galas now occasionally hosted something far less polished and far more precious. Lily's 4th birthday party, complete with a bounce house set up awkwardly beside the marble fountain, and half the household staff invited as actual guests instead of hired hands standing quietly along the walls. Daniel and Maya's relationship had grown slowly into something the entire estate had come to cherish, though neither of them had rushed to make grand public announcements. They didn't need cameras or headlines to know what they had built was real. It showed in smaller ways. In the way Daniel now automatically set 3 places at the table instead of 1, in the way Lily called him Daddy, for the first time on a quiet Tuesday evening over spaghetti, so casually that Daniel had to excuse himself to the kitchen for a moment, overwhelmed, before composing himself enough to come back and simply say, "Yeah, buddy," as if his heart wasn't cracking open with joy. On a warm evening in early June, exactly 1 year after the night Maya and Lily had been ordered out into the cold, Daniel gathered the household staff in the garden, the same garden that backed up to the small quarters Maya used to call home. Fairy lights hung between the trees. A small string quartet played, much quieter and gentler than the one from that gala a year earlier. This time there was no calculated guest list, no press hovering at the gates, no orchids chosen to match a color palette. Just the people who actually mattered. Daniel knelt in front of Maya, in front of everyone, and asked her to marry him. Not with the kind of ring meant to make headlines, but with one that had belonged to his mother, a woman whose staff who'd worked for the family for decades said, would have loved Maya instantly. Maya said yes before he even finished the question, tears streaming down her face, Lily jumping up and down beside them shouting, "Say yes, say yes!" Even though she barely understood what was being asked, only that everyone was smiling and that felt like enough reason to celebrate. Word of the engagement did eventually reach Victoria, wherever she'd settled after leaving the estate that night a year earlier. She never reached out. There was, in the end, nothing left to say. Some people learn from moments that expose who they really are. Others simply move on to the next room where they hope no one will notice. The story never dwells on what she chose, because the story was never really about her. It was about a woman who thought a uniform made someone invisible, and a household that proved otherwise. Maya Bennett didn't marry a billionaire because she was looking for one. She never once, in 2 years of working in that house, asked Daniel Whitmore for anything beyond fair pay and quiet respect. What she got in return wasn't a fairy tale handed to her. It was recognition, earned slowly and honestly, of a kindness she'd been showing all along without expecting anything back. And Lily, the little girl once told she didn't belong at her own home's biggest party, grew up in that same mansion not as the help's daughter, but as a little girl who was loved fiercely, openly, and without condition, by a father who chose to see her worth on a cold staircase before he ever chose anything else. So here's what this story really leaves us with. Kindness is never wasted, even when no one seems to be watching. Especially then. Because sometimes the person who sees it isn't standing in the room with you. Sometimes they're watching quietly from a balcony above. And that one unseen moment changes absolutely everything. If this story moved you even a little, do me a favor. Hit that like button. It genuinely helps this story reach more people who need a little hope today. Subscribe if you're new here because we tell stories just like this one every single week. And if you know someone who needs a reminder that kindness always finds its way back around, share this with them right now. Thank you for watching till the very end. I'll see you in the next story.